We called the place the mill, mostly because nobody could remember what it had actually been built for. Some folks said it used to process grain, others swore it was for feed, maybe even soybeans, but the truth had slipped away long before we were born. The building sat by itself at the very end of a lonely road that started off paved, turned to gravel, and finally crumbled into dirt, like the town itself had gotten tired halfway through and just gave up. It rose 4 stories tall, all worn brick the shade of dried blood, with empty black windows staring out like blind eyes. A crooked fire escape clung to one side, zigzagging up the wall like some rusted spiderweb, and every breeze made the metal steps tremble and let out a ghostly hum. The mill sat a mile past the last scattered ranch house and another 2 past the Dairy Queen, which was about as far as civilization reached. That summer, the surrounding fields weren't planted with corn. Instead, they were overrun with shoulder-high weeds, prickly foxtails, wildflowers like Queen Anne's lace, and milkweed bursting open to release soft white fuzz that floated everywhere. The only other structure nearby was a squat concrete office building with a roof that curled up at the edge like a sneer. A chain-link fence circled the lot, though half of it was sunken in the grass, bent and broken where kids had crawled under. Somebody had hung faded "No trespassing" signs along the fence. Somebody else had used the signs for target practice and punched holes clean through them. Back then we were 12 and 13, stuck in a town that didn't offer much beyond boredom. Most days it was the same 5 of us, me, Jake, Brandon, Chris, and Emily. We had our bikes, a beat-up deck of cards missing half the queens, a soccer ball that always swerved left, and a pair of walkie-talkies that only worked sometimes if you were lucky and standing still. Mostly we just had long afternoons, heavy with heat and nothing to do, and we filled them with the mill. Jake was the one with all the ideas. He didn't look like the sort of leader you saw in movies. No broad chest or square jaw that could light a match, but he was wiry, quick on his feet, and always talking with his hands. He had a grin that pulled you in, made you forget you'd sworn you weren't about to do whatever he was cooking up. Brandon was his shadow, a head taller than the rest of us, the kind of kid who got into trouble just because he couldn't say no to a friend. He was also the kind who could apologize to a teacher with his whole face and usually get out of it. Emily was sharp and restless, always pushing against rules just because they were there, laughing while she broke them. Chris was the youngest, soft-cheeked, and quick to act like he wasn't scared when everybody knew he was. He chewed his hoodie strings until they turned into stiff little ropes. And me? I wasn't the brave one, or the funny one, or the daring one. I don't even remember exactly how I ended up in that circle of friends. One day it just felt like they had always been a part of me. The summer I'm talking about was bone dry. Dust coated everything until it looked like the whole world had been dipped in chalk. The weeds whispered whenever you brushed past them, and grasshoppers snapped into the air, flying in jerky arcs like rocks skipping off water. The only shade belonged to the building itself, a thin shadow that slid across the ground and wasn't much help unless you followed it. We liked to show up late in the day, when the sun finally started to lose the fight. The very first time we played Manhunt at the mill, it was because Jake threw out the dare in that voice of his, the one that made things sound like they were already decided. You are all too chicken to play for real. Define, for real, Emily shot back, rolling her eyes. Inside, he said, grinning. The whole place. One person counts, everyone else hides. No roofs. No silos. We are not climbing into the silos, Brandon said, horrified at a danger none of us had even suggested. Obviously not, Jake replied. First one caught is it. Next round, same rules. No whining. And no, I swear I heard something creepy in there. You are going to hear pigeons, maybe rats. It is a building, not a ghost story. He snipped open the fence where it sagged, and we slid under on our bellies one at a time, tasting rust on the air. The main factory door had been welded shut years ago, but there were plenty of other ways inside. The old office had a broken panel in the back wall, and that was our entrance. We ducked under loose wires and a strip of yellow caution tape so faded it had forgotten its warning. Inside, the place smelled of mildew, old cardboard, spilled oil, and mouse droppings. Someone had spray-painted a crude cartoon on the wall at kid height, and somebody else had left Dan plus Michelle 1997 in neat bubble letters below a dusty calendar from 1994. Past the office, the hallway opened up into the main floor, and the smell shifted. The air had a sharp, metallic tang, like licking a battery. Dust swirled in our flashlight beams, turning into glitter when the last light of the sun slipped through broken windows. The huge space was nothing but concrete and the rusted skeletons of machines. Funnels and chutes angled down into the floor like throats leading underground. Overhead, a catwalk stretched across the room, dropping rusty stains onto the ground where it bled. Somewhere far back in the dark, water dripped steadily into a metal bucket, ping, ping, ping. Pigeons shuffled and cooed in the rafters, and the sound was anything but friendly in that echoing cavern. "Smells like a handful of pennies," Emily said. "It is disgusting," Brandon muttered, and I could not tell if he meant gross or awesome. "We spread out because that is what you do in a place too big and too strange. You move, make noise, and pretend you are not afraid." Jake pressed his palm against the brick wall and said, 60 seconds. Loud, so everybody hears. "Ready? 1, 2, 3, his voice echoed and rolled around the room, making the emptiness seem even bigger, and at the same time, somehow smaller. I grabbed Chris by the sleeve and whispered, "This way." "Where exactly?" he shot back, trying to make his voice sound steady. It still came out thin and shaky. "Upstairs office," I said, even though I had no clue if there really was one. It just felt like a building like this ought to have some little box of a room up high where a boss could stare down at everyone working. We hugged the wall and slid through a maze of rusted machinery, ducking under a sagging belly of metal panels, until we found a stairwell. It carried us up through the stench of pigeon droppings and hot steel, all the way to a small room with windows stained grease gray. Inside was a wreck. A desk tipped onto its side. A rolling chair laying flat on its back. A coffee mug glued to the floor by what had once been coffee and was now just brown crust under a layer of dust. A curling wall calendar. A forgotten jacket still hanging on a peg, shaped like the ghost of the man who left it there. The windows overlooked the factory floor below, just like one of those control booths in a low-budget movie. "Perfect," I said, and we slid down behind the desk. Chris was breathing like he had just sprinted across town. A sudden racket of feet on metal made us both jerk. Brandon was moving too fast across the catwalk above us. A pigeon exploded across the window so close I caught the flash of its eye. 27, 28, Jake's voice floated up from below. My skin prickled cold, even though he sounded casual. That bored, flat tone boys use is always the sign they're about to do something reckless. They have to act like nothing could possibly touch them. Chris gave me a quick grin, all teeth, a grin that carried everything the game was supposed to mean. "I am not scared. I am here with my friends. This place belongs to us." Then we heard footsteps. Not from the catwalk, not running, but right outside the office. Slow. Heavy. They had weight, like boots hitting the ground. The sound stopped just past the doorway. I froze, lungs locked. Chris froze too. That was when I picked up something else, a faint breath. Steady. Close. Not mine. I leaned just enough to peek through the thin crack at the edge of the desk, catching a sliver of the hall. Nothing. Just bare concrete. A stripe of paint peeling off the wall. But the breathing did not belong to an empty hallway. It was close but far all at once, like it had no business coming from where it did. Chris's eyes asked, "Do you hear it?" Mine answered, "Do not move." "Ready or not," Jake shouted, "here I come." The breathing cut off. The footsteps started again, moving away. Unhurried. They melted into the creaks and groans of the building settling around us. "Probably Emily," Chris mouthed. "Probably," I mouthed back, though I knew better. Emily never walked like that. She had a bounce to her step, a kind of restless energy that came through in little toe taps and quick movements. These steps belonged to someone who had all the time in the world. Jake found Brandon first, which bought us more time. Brandon was too tall to hide well and too stubborn to cheat. Eventually, a hand clamped the back of my shirt and yanked, and I yelped. It was Emily, grinning like she had just won the lottery. "Get your butts up, you turtles," she whispered. "You coming or what?" "We heard someone," Chris blurted. "You heard me," she said with a smirk, rolling her eyes so hard she made it sound like we had invented the whole thing just to feel special. She tugged us into the hallway, and soon the slap of our sneakers drowned out any other sound that might have been there. We squeezed in 2 more rounds before the day gave up on us. I got caught fast. Standing still never was my talent. Every time somebody bolted, the pigeons exploded into the air, giving them away. The sun slanted lower, turning the dust into gold, then copper, then that deep brown that stained your feet when you ran barefoot all day. Chris hid behind a stack of wooden pallets shaped like jagged teeth, then in a half-open chute. I made him crawl back out, telling him he would get stuck and we would have to explain it to somebody with a clipboard. We stumbled out of there at sunset, dizzy with dust and the high of winning and losing. Chris had a smear of rust across his cheek like war paint. Emily carried pigeon crap on her sleeve and did not notice. Jake vaulted the fence with a showy little kick. Brandon struggled over awkwardly, then reached back to help me because my shirt snagged on a twisted piece of wire. "Again tomorrow," Jake said. He could not help himself, he always had to push until something broke. "Again tomorrow," we echoed back. I remember that ride home like a photograph left out too long in the sun. The 5 of us pedaling hard, lined up like a ragged arrow cutting down the empty road, the mill shrinking behind us but still coming along in the ringing of my ears. I felt like we had shaken something awake inside that place, something that had been sleeping too long. On the second day we came better prepared. This time we brought stronger flashlights, a pack of snacks, and a disposable camera. The camera was one of those green Kodaks, the kind where you had to grind the little lever forward with your thumb to advance the film. I had bought it at the gas station with money I earned mowing Mrs. Parker's lawn, planning to save it for the last day of summer before school started. My idea was to take pictures of the creek, our bikes, and our dumb faces making faces. But I could not resist using it early. I snapped one of us at the fence, Jake throwing his same cocky kick, Emily flipping the bird, Brandon somehow managing to look like a yearbook photo even while making fun, and Chris trying to look tough but failing in the most obvious way. That picture still exists. It is sitting in a shoebox up high on a closet shelf where I cannot run into it by accident. At the office door, Jake got serious all of a sudden. "New rules," he said. "No roofs. No silos. Nobody goes past the orange line." "What orange line?" Brandon asked. Jake led us inside to the main floor and pointed to a big rectangle painted on the concrete around a hulking metal cabinet and a cluster of tanks. The paint was faded to the shade of stale cheddar. At each corner, someone had scrawled warnings, danger/do not enter/lockout. A fourth corner had words, too, but the pigeons had left enough white streaks to erase them. "You do not cross this line," Jake said. "You can hide around it, but you do not go inside. And you never, ever go down the hatch if it is open." Emily's hair fell in her eyes as she tilted her head, her tone all challenge. "How do you know there's a hatch?" "Because my cousin used to work here before it shut down," Jake told her. "He said they dumped stuff into pits, ground it up. Like this." He spun his hand in the air like a blender. "If you fall into a hopper, nobody hears you except the poor guy who has to fill out the safety form." "Gross," Chris muttered, but his eyes shone like he admired it. Then we played. And like always, we were louder than we meant to be and quieter than we thought we were, because that is how kids are. The building made it worse. Our voices bent around corners. Our footsteps split in two and came back together. Wind outside made the fire escape screech, and that screech echoed everywhere at once. We scattered and collided again in pockets of shadow, grinning, chasing, hiding. First round, Emily counted, chewing gum as loud as she could. And I thought to myself, that gum does not sound like hers. The popping was sticky and heavy, not sharp like hers always was. When I peeked, though, nobody else was chewing. Second round, Brandon counted. While he was stuck on 29, 30, a door at the far end of the hall eased shut with a soft click. None of us had gone that way. Third round, it was my turn. When I got to 50, everyone was gone and my voice felt small. That was when I noticed the chalk. The marks were low on the wall, just above the baseboard in the old office hall, near where the window spilled a pale rectangle of light. 5 sets of hash marks were clustered together. Next to each set was a name scratched in messy kid handwriting, J/T/S/H/C, then there was a sixth. Just the letter E. 5 of us. And E. "Guys?" I called out, my voice too loud. It came out like I was not asking but begging. "Jake?" The stairwell on the far side gave a single metallic clank, like somebody had put a foot down in the wrong place. Chris darted by at the end of the hallway, caught me looking, and made a goofy face like I was already caught. Somewhere up above, a pigeon kept throwing itself into a window over and over with a dumb thump. But the chalk marks stayed where they were, waiting. I reached out and rubbed one, and fresh chalk smeared onto my fingertip. Not old, not crumbled to powder. New. Somebody else had made them. "Ready or not," I muttered, and forced myself forward. I found Brandon crouched behind a tipped-over conveyor belt. I found Emily sitting cross-legged by a nest of pipes, chewing gum that clicked the way hers always did. I found Jake wedged by the loading dock, folded into the narrow space between the cinderblock wall and the bent rubber bumper like a cat. We swapped roles, counted again, and drifted through the place as the light thinned into angles of gold. Then Chris stopped answering. "Hiding too good," Jake said, trying to sound impressed. "Cheating," Emily countered, trying to sound annoyed. "Chris." Brandon bellowed, his voice breaking the name into 3 syllables that barely sounded like a word. No answer. No laugh. No shuffle of sneakers. Not even the dumb flutter of pigeons. The whole factory pressed in around us like it was holding its breath too. We spread out. We checked the stupidest spots, inside the hollow metal cabinets that held nothing, behind the same tipped desk upstairs where I had thought we were clever, even in the bathroom where the stalls had been kicked apart but still felt private enough that you wanted to knock. My hands trembled the way they do now when my blood sugar drops, but back then I thought it was fear, or maybe excitement. We shouted Chris's name again and again, and the sound of it filled the place so heavy it seemed impossible that he could not hear us. I found Chris's backpack abandoned behind a stack of pallets near the orange line. It was open like somebody had just set it down, a warm Capri Sun, his inhaler, a smear of Skittles half melted into sugar goo, a pen he had chewed to near nothing, and the loose end of his hoodie string that had not yet been worn into a rope. Right then the kind of fear that sits quiet in the back of your throat stood up and shrugged its coat on. He would not leave his bag, Brandon said, his voice flat and rehearsed like he was already practicing how he would tell a grown-up later. Chris. Jake's voice cracked on the second syllable. He did not look at any of us when he said it. Maybe he went outside to pee, Emily offered, but there was no joke in it and I could hear that she did not believe it either. We did the only two things kids do when a mistake gets big enough to see. We panicked hard, and then we tried to act sensible. We agreed to meet back at the office door in 5 minutes. Then we split up, each taking a floor, moving too fast, catching ourselves, then moving too slow. I went down to the lowest level where the concrete sweated and the standing puddles had a thin skin on them. The pipes down there had insulation hanging off them like rotten fur. More graffiti lived on those walls, not the crude stuff but neat block letters in a different hand, quiet hours, clean Monday, names and times that read like somebody's work schedule and a map to a life I did not want to imagine. Above a rusted sink someone had written "No odors," underlined 3 times. There was a real bedroll against the far wall, black nylon with a zipper, laid on top of cardboard, a folded blanket with a hat sitting on it like someone had put it there carefully. Next to it I recognized a grocery bag from the cheap store in town with the corner of a loaf of bread peeking out. A plastic laundry line was strung between 2 pipes with a shirt draped over it to dry, buttons missing, washed and wrung out, hung with equal care on each side like symmetry was the only dignity that person had left. Beside the bedroll, arranged in a neat, almost ceremonial line, were 5 cigarette butts lying parallel to the wall. Not crushed. Not tossed. Lined up like someone had counted them out on purpose. Something tightened in me, an odd stiffness, like my bones had opinions. I felt watched from behind, the sensation of eyes on my back. I wanted to turn and look and at the same time hoped I would not. The air down there was too cold for a summer afternoon, not refrigerated cold, but the kind of cold that belongs to places pressed up against stone for a long time. Guys, I said to the room, meaning the faces I could see and the ones I could not. Guys. When I moved, something else moved with me, a shadow that belonged to both before and after, my shoulder catching its own light. I backed toward the stairs, then ran up them, forcing myself to slow so I could breathe. At the main floor I broke into a run. Jake was already at the office door, paler than sunburn and white where he was not burned. Emily climbed up behind him with her mouth set and her hands dusty. Brandon was not there. We had to go look for him. We found him in the hall by the chalk marks, rubbing them with his thumb until dust ground into his skin. "Those were not here yesterday," he said like a prayer. "Those were not here." We spilled back outside. It did not feel like surrender, it was a physical need like thirst. The light stabbed at our eyes and made the world look too bright and too flat, like we had come up out of water. Jake braced his hands on a fence post and dropped his head. Emily snapped, "If he is hiding as a joke I am going to kill him." Brandon counted us under his breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, shaping the numbers like a chant to keep whatever was loose in check. We shouted Chris's name into the weeds and it wavered thin in the heat. We called into the office, at the loading dock, and even at the stairwell that led up to the roof, even though we had promised no roofs. The building hummed on as if rules and names were meaningless to it. When we went back inside, the orange rectangle on the floor had changed. One corner had a chip out of the paint you would not notice unless you were looking for small shifts in the world when you were not in it. The metal cabinet inside the line had a padlock whose loop had been pried open, the little silver brackets were bent. Scuff marks scarred the concrete where something heavy had been dragged. Beside the scuffs, a smear of muddy water left by a wet shoe. I planted my foot next to it and felt my stomach drop. The print in my head was Chris's shoe small, but this tread was wrong. The pattern had a little box in the heel like a stamp. None of our soles left that mark. "Okay," Jake said, over and over, the way people say I am fine when they are bleeding. "Okay. Okay. We get help. We go now." He bolted first, and the rest of us tore after him. We left Chris's backpack where it was, because we had that dumb kid logic about putting things back the way you found them so you did not get into more trouble than you were already in. That kind of thinking is the truest measure of how young we still were. We ran hard for the road, feet pounding on the sharp gravel, then the softer shoulder, then the hot asphalt that burned up through our sneakers. Jake pedaled his bike so fast he nearly wiped out twice. Emily sprinted until she caught a stitch in her side, bent double swearing at herself, then straightened and pushed on. Brandon trotted steady like some machine that never quit. I tried to squeeze more speed out of my legs, but they were already at their limit. By the time we stumbled up to the first house at the edge of town, a single-story ranch with a sun-faded flag drooping on the porch and a plastic toy mower rusting in the yard, my throat was raw, tasting like pennies and bile. A woman with skin tanned like old leather opened the door. She looked at us the way you look at a raccoon on your porch, not sure if you should feed it or chase it off. Jake started, but he bent over, hands on his knees, gagging. The words did not come. Inside, she said, no hesitation now, her whole face changing. Inside. Now. The police came. Then the parents. The factory that afternoon was not our factory anymore, it was theirs. Adults in reflective vests, a van with hazards blinking, radios buzzing and clipped words that made everything both sharper and further away. I stood in the shade of a tree at the edge of the lot and watched strangers step through holes in the walls I already knew too well. I wished I didn't. An officer with Arsha Spencer, stitched on her uniform, crouched down to my level. She wanted me to start at the beginning. I told her everything, the chalk marks, the neat bedroll, the 5 cigarette butts laid in a line, the orange-painted box, the shoe tread I didn't recognize, and the breath I had felt by the office door the day before. The grown-up searched like we had, yelling his name as if shouting it loud enough could work like a net, hauling him back into place. They shook their heads at things only adults shake their heads at, codes, liability, paperwork for cutting locks. They did break the bent lock in the end. Inside the cabinet were electrical switches, long-handled ones tagged feed auger 3 and emergency stop. I watched one man tap a switch with his pen, jotting something down on a clipboard. Another man raised his camera, photographing a smear none of us had noticed before, a faint brown streak across the concrete, dragged and broken, dragged again, then stopping cold. When the flash fired, the pigeons went berserk. They drove us home as the sky dimmed, because kids always get taken home. Chris's mother was out in her yard, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, crying so loud it bent the air around her. Neighbors looked away, then looked back, because some sounds turn private grief into public noise. His father was a thick-shouldered man with a voice ground flat. He kept repeating, "He'll be at the creek." He went to the creek, like if he said it enough he could rewrite what had already happened. He had a beer can in one hand, crushing the thin metal without ever drinking from it. We lied, each of us, about parts of the day. Nobody wanted the trespassing trouble stacked on top of the bigger trouble. But small towns eat secrets quick. By morning, the truth of where we had been was out. By that afternoon, the factory wore new signs, bright, red, plastic warnings barking orders at kids who had already learned how easy it was to slip under that fence. There were searches. Men with sticks prodding through ditches, volunteers in neon vests walking shoulder to shoulder across the fields like a slow parade. A helicopter hovered for an hour, circled, and vanished. The sheriff climbed onto a truck hood with a megaphone, his words spilling out over the crowd, no evidence of foul play. Later, Chris's school picture was taped up on a poster, then a bigger one, then a whole wall at the gas station. There was a reward. If you're waiting for me to say we found his shoe, or his hat, or some shard of bone, I cannot. That is not the story I have. The story I carry is the one where a boy walks into a place and does not come out, and forever after your body jerks at the sight of any kid in a hoodie with strings chewed ragged. The story where adults take a building seriously for a week, then less, then not at all. The story where the sheriff tells a reporter, "We are investigating all possibilities, including that the boy may have run away," and you feel something rot inside you because you know what kind of lie the word "including" can cover. 5 weeks on, the posters curled at the edges, soaked with night damp, sagging until nobody replaced them. After a year, the factory wore a shiny new padlock like a badge, half its windows were boarded up, and the old graffiti had been blotted out with square gray patches that turned the whole place into a broken crossword puzzle. We were the same kids on the outside, but inside everything had shifted. Jake got sharper, meaner for a while, and then he just went quiet. Brandon buried himself in his schoolwork so hard he stopped thinking about anything else and ended up skipping 2 grades, gone to college before I even finished high school. Emily drifted through people like she was trying on lives, one girlfriend, another, then a boyfriend, and finally left for the city, only coming back for short weekends that felt more like layovers than visits. As for me, the smell of wet cardboard could freeze me up like a hand on the back of my neck. There are things I never told back then that I can finally say now. 2 weeks after Chris vanished, I went back alone. This is the part where you probably shake your head and call me a fool, and you'd be right. I told my mom I was at the library, and my dad was off driving long haul, so I was free to make my mistake. It was early September, the heat finally broken, the air like a long exhale. The fence had a new repair, sagging just enough to show it was fresh. I slipped through, circled to the low office, and ducked into the cool strip of shadow. I had the disposable camera in my back pocket, like light could be evidence if I caught it just right. The place felt hollow without the others. The pigeons cooed and shifted but didn't scatter as quickly with only one set of footsteps. My own steps sounded rude. On the main floor, the walls were scarred with square patches of gray paint where graffiti had been wiped out. The orange line had been repainted, bright again, as if sharper danger would help. The chalk marks in the hall were gone. The wall was just a pale smear, messy like a badly erased blackboard. Over it, someone had spray-painted a fat bubble tag, a date, and a handle I didn't recognize. I went down anyway, to the lowest level, the place I couldn't stop thinking about. The air was cold again, not cool like shade, but stone cold, like it had been underground for too long. The bedroll was gone, the cardboard cleaned away by someone who thought about safety. The laundry line had been replaced with new nylon string, empty. Over the sink, the old word still waited, no odors, once in the careful hand, and again, bigger, rounder letters scratched into the plaster, underlined so hard it gouged. There were more cigarette butts too, but not arranged in a line this time. Just dumped in a pile. I raised the camera and snapped shots without even lining them up right, sink, corner, floor, pipes. Each flash cracked the dark into pieces, and for a second I caught the puddle on the floor mirroring the ceiling. The ceiling had a stain shaped almost like a hand, or maybe water, or maybe nothing. The camera whined as I wound the lever, waiting for the red dot to glow again. That's when I heard it. Not words, a sound. A cough. A wet little cough, the kind you make when you half clear your throat but do not bother because you think no one is listening. It came from the stairwell, from the place where the shadow pooled beneath the steps. It wasn't a pipe creak or a bird. It was a sound made by lungs, by flesh. "Hello?" I said, though I didn't know why. Instinct told me running would be worse, even though standing still felt like a mistake too. "Hello?" No answer. Then, soft, just a scrape. Like a shoelace being pulled through a tight eyelet. I didn't move. I lifted the camera to my chest, pressed the button. The flash exploded, freezing that corner into a photograph, a pale coin of a face that might have been just a smear on the concrete, a shoulder that might have been a beam, and, God help me, an eye. I know how it sounds. People have told me over and over that I saw what I expected to see. That it was pareidolia, just shapes, shadows, a word with enough syllables to make people feel safe. But in that instant, I stepped back, once, twice, then turned and forced myself to walk, not run, until I hit the hallway. Then I ran. The factory let me go, like it hadn't even noticed I was there. 2 days later, I dropped off the camera at the drugstore. The clerk joked about how outdated film was, said they still processed a few rolls for old men and weddings, handed me a little claim ticket. A week passed, then another, they said the machine ate someone else's negatives. Finally, the envelope was mine. I stood outside in the heat, flipping through the prints, feeling scared and stupid both at once, until the fear crawled hot up the back of my neck. First photo, all of us at the fence, dumb and smiling. Second, Emily blowing a gum bubble, the gum gray on film. Third, sunlight cutting the dust like a galaxy. Fourth, a blur from running too fast up the stair. Fifth, the hallway, no chalk marks yet, just the smear. Sixth, the sink with its warning. Seventh, the bare corner where the bed had been. Eighth, under the stair. If I hand that photo to you, you'll see whatever your brain is ready to see. Maybe just a stain. Maybe a dark smudge of shadow. Maybe the line where something that has been there forever meets something new. But me? I see an eye. An eye staring right into the flash, and I imagine the way the dark came rushing back after that bright second, and the way someone standing close enough to scrape their shoelace would hold still and silent until I left. I told no one. Not because I wanted to hold it close, but because I already knew what adults would say, and because the photo proved nothing except that corners make shadows. I slid the envelope into a shoebox and shut it away. I told myself the person who had lived there, if there really was one, had tried for dignity, Monday wash, no odors, neat rows of cigarettes, softened bread, a hat. I told myself my running was rude. I told myself just enough stories to grow up, to graduate, to turn 18 and leave. Time passed the way it does, sneaky until it isn't. Cody's mother moved away. His father didn't. Once, years later, when I was back in town for a funeral, a friend's mom, you go whether you want to or not, I saw him at the gas station. He was buying cigarettes and wiper fluid. He said my name and froze, like he'd reached for a stove burner. "You were there," he said. "Yes," I answered. There was no version of "I'm sorry," that didn't just mean "I feel bad." That wasn't the point. He nodded, paid, left. The bell chimed after him, again and again, and then the store was only humming coolers. The factory came down the next year, not in one dramatic collapse, but piece by piece, insult by insult. They tore out the stair first. The sound of it woke me in my new apartment 3 miles away, though it couldn't have carried that far. They combed the ground like a cat burying waste. They poured a slab. They put up a fence and a sign, "Coming soon, self-storage." I went one last time before it was erased completely. The fence was locked for real now, not the kind you snip with a boy's garage tools. I walked the perimeter at dusk, swift stitching the air, insects droning. Where the office had been was only gravel, newly raked. And there, half buried at the edge where the machines hadn't yet reached, was a loop. At first I thought coin. Then I saw, the orange ring from a plastic soda bottle, the kind that snaps free the first time you twist the cap. A shoelace threaded through it, knotted. Not spaced unevenly, close on one side, far on the other. The way Cody tied his laces. 3, a thumb's width, 2, a thumb's width. He'd once told me it made him feel like he was measuring time. I didn't touch it. Didn't take a picture. This is the part where you say it was trash. Nothing. A coincidence. 100 boys, 100 knots. I won't argue with you. I only know I couldn't put my hand where his might have been. I didn't want to be wrong in that direction either. I didn't want to steal something that might have been left to say, "I was here." We played manhunt after that, but not there. In yards, in the drywall-smelling new subdivision, in the woods by the creek where water skaters scribbled across the surface. We always counted wrong. Counted slow, ended fast. We got older. Smaller. Learned to drive. Left. Left again. Now, when someone invites me to an urban explore or a warehouse art show, I say I have a thing, and I make my voice warm enough that no one asks what. I do have a thing. A room of dust, a low ceiling, a cough in the dark, a shoelace scrape too careful not to be heard. If you're looking for a moral, I don't have one. If you're looking for a clean circle to fence off the bad part and say it stops here, I can't give you that either. We say we were kids, we didn't know better. True, but only at a slant. We knew it was forbidden, and that made it worth it. We knew cutting fences was a kind of bad you could brag about. What we didn't know was the weight of another person's breath in a corner. What we didn't know was how long not knowing could last. People love to ask what you'd do different if you could go back. It's a nonsense question. We all go back, in our heads, and we always make the same choices. Sometimes faster. If you force me to answer, I would have stopped at the office door. I would have told Jake no game today. I would have taken the camera home and filled it with dragonflies, shopping carts, our dumb grinning faces. I don't get to do that. What I get is this, a shoebox, a photo, a knot pattern I can't untie. The coppery tang in the air when fear thins the skin of the world. All the reasons you'll say this is nothing, and all the reasons I can't forget a cough under the stair. That's my record. That's the whole story. I hope you never need one of your own.